Aston Martin completed just 50% of all race laps in 2026, not because of bad luck, not because of inexperience, because the car was physically destroying itself every time it hit the track. This is a team that spent $276 million on a state-of-the-art factory, that hired Adrian Newey, the greatest car designer in Formula One history, but with a package worth an estimated $30 million per year, that signed a four-time world champion in Alonso and built an exclusive works partnership with Honda that had, on paper, everything a team needs to compete for a world championship. And they built a car that runs 30 kilometers per hour, slower than the rest of the field on the straights, shakes so violently it triggers automatic retirement alarms, and has completed fewer race laps than any team on the grid. Here's the part nobody is saying clearly. This wasn't bad luck. This was the result of specific engineering decisions, specific management failures, and a structural conflict that was visible long before the cars hit the track. The disaster was built before the car was. If you want to understand how the most expensive project in modern F1 became its biggest failure, stay here. This is where it gets explained. To understand what went wrong in 2026, you need to understand what Lawrence Stroll actually built between 2019 and 2025, because the scale of it makes the collapse even harder to process. Stroll didn't just buy a struggling midfield team, he bought the assets of Force India in 2018, rebranded to Racing Point, then relaunched as Aston Martin for 2021, with a long-term vision that almost nobody in the paddock took seriously at first. His stated goal was a world championship within 10 years. The media laughed, the paddock was skeptical, but then he started spending money in a way that changed the conversation. He built the AMR Technology Campus in Silverstone, 400,000 square feet, a wind tunnel, an advanced simulator facility, automated logistics hubs. Construction started in 2021 and was completed by 2025. The final bill was $276 million. For context, that's more than most teams spend on car development over several seasons. It is, by any measure, the most ambitious infrastructure investment a midfield team has ever made in Formula One. Then came the people. Dan Fallows, poached from Red Bull, Eric Blandon, recruited from a rival operation, Enrico Cardelli, taken directly from Ferrari, one of the most respected aerodynamicists in the sport. And then, in September 2024, Adrian Newey, who had just left Red Bull after 18 years and 3 Constructors' Championships, signed with Aston Martin. The announcement shook the paddock. For the first time, Stroll's project felt genuinely credible. On top of that, Honda were announced as Works Engine Partner from 2026. This was the same Honda operation that had powered Red Bull to multiple championships. Now it would be exclusive to Aston Martin under the new regulations. The momentum was real. Everyone assumed that by 2026, Aston Martin would arrive as a genuine championship contender. The factory was ready. The talent was in place. The regulations were new, which meant the field would reset. And with Newey designing the first car with that level of infrastructure behind him, the logical conclusion was a car capable of winning races. But what the data from 2026 suggests is that the project collapsed not from the outside, not from a budget problem, not from a regulation disadvantage, but from the inside. From a structural failure that no amount of money could fix once it was already embedded in the car. The first thing that caught my attention was the shakedown data. While Mercedes were logging 500 laps in preseason testing, Aston Martin managed 65. The cars arrived 3 days late to the shakedown, not 1 day late. 3. In Formula One, where every kilometer of testing data is critical for development, losing 3 days before the first race of a brand new regulation cycle is not a minor inconvenience. It is a catastrophic information deficit. The conservative interpretation, Aston were being cautious with a brand new car under brand new regulations. Better to be late and reliable than fast and broken. The explosive interpretation, the AMR 26 wasn't ready, not nearly ready. The 65 laps they managed weren't enough to identify, let alone solve, the fundamental problems that were already present in the design. They went to Bahrain knowing the car had issues they hadn't diagnosed yet. According to multiple paddock sources, the core problem was a packaging conflict between Newey's aerodynamic concept and Honda's power unit requirements. Newey built the AMR 26 around an extremely aggressive and compact aero philosophy, the kind of design that works brilliantly in simulation because the air airflow is perfect, the temperatures are ideal, and the physical stresses aren't real. But Honda's RA626H, under the complex new 2026 hybrid regulations, required specific cooling volumes and specific MGUK placement that conflicted directly with that compact packaging. In the wind tunnel, the car looked like a championship winner. The supercomputer agreed. But the second the rubber hit the track, the physics broke down. The airflow was separating, the floor was stalling unpredictably, and there was no mechanical or aerodynamic grip to speak of. This raises a question that nobody has answered publicly. How did two groups of highly experienced engineers, Newey's aero team and Honda's power unit department, work under the same roof for over a year and not identify this conflict before the car was built? And then the second piece of evidence made everything worse. The second thing worth examining is what happened when Aston tried to fix the car in Melbourne. After a disastrous preseason, the Silverstone factory went into panic mode. They had weeks to find a quick fix for a broken concept. They added larger cooling vents to manage the thermal issues. They stiffened the suspension to prevent the floor from stalling unpredictably. And they rushed a new aerodynamic package to the car for Australia. The logic was sound. If the floor is stalling because of inconsistent ride height, stiffen the suspension so the floor stays planted. Straightforward engineering response to a diagnosed problem, except stiffening the suspension caused a violent vibration that transmitted directly through the chassis and into the engine. The vibration was severe enough to cause immediate reliability issues. The car that arrived in Melbourne wasn't just slower, it was mechanically self-destructive. According to sources covering the team, the vibration problem in Melbourne was described internally as worse than anything they had seen in testing. Alonso ended the race 11 laps down on the leader. Lawrence Stroll was 15 laps down when the team retired his car. The cars were triggering automatic retirement alarms mid-race, a system designed to protect the power unit by forcing a box when vibration levels exceeded a safe threshold. If a team's car is automatically telling drivers to pit for safety reasons during a Grand Prix, that is not a development problem. That is a fundamental structural problem, reopener. And if stiffening the suspension made the vibration worse, what happens when you try to loosen it again? Do you go back to a stalling floor? The third piece of evidence is the telemetry data from Japan. By the time F1 reached Japan, Aston had brought a major power unit upgrade, revised the chassis to give the engine more space, and modified the underfloor and front wing. The vibrations were better. Alonso finished the race in P8, the first meaningful result of the season, but the telemetry data told a different story. On the straights in Japan, the AMR26 was 30 kilometers per hour slower than the rest of the field. Not 5 kilometers per hour, not 10, 30. The reason, according to reports, was something called funeral processions mode, a condition where the car has to run at reduced RPM to prevent the vibrations from becoming dangerous again. Lower RPM means the MGUK can't fully charge the battery. A battery that can't fully charge means no deployment on the straight, and no deployment means 30 kilometers per hour of straight line deficit that no aerodynamic upgrade can compensate for. This suggests the vibration problem isn't just a suspension issue, it's a power unit integration issue at a fundamental level, and fixing it requires a solution that goes deeper than any surface level upgrade can reach. Here's the angle that almost no coverage is addressing directly. The technical problems with the AMR26 are real and severe, but the reason they haven't been solved, and the reason each attempted fix has made something else worse, is not purely engineering. It's structural, it's organizational, and it's been visible since before the car launched. Aston Martin built a team with multiple power centers and no clear chain of command. You had Adrian Newey, a designer of legendary status who operates with almost total autonomy, working alongside Andy Cowell in the power unit department, with Lawrence Stroll micromanaging the operation from above, and team principal Mike Crack reportedly feeling undermined by Newey's reach across the entire technical structure. In a high-functioning F1 team, there is one technical director, one clear decision maker on the car, one person who resolves the conflicts between aero philosophy, power unit requirements, and chassis behavior. Aston Martin had several senior figures with competing visions, no defined hierarchy below the ownership level, and an owner who was reportedly involved in engineering decisions that should have been insulated from commercial pressure. The result was a car built by committee, not in the superficial sense, but in the most damaging sense. The aero concept and the power unit concept were never forced to truly compromise with each other, because there was no single authority with the power and the credibility to make that call. If this is actually what's happening inside that Silverstone building, then Aston Martin has a structural problem that no B-spec upgrade can fix on its own. Because the same decision-making environment that produced the AMR26 will also be making the decisions on the B-spec, and if the management DNA doesn't change before the new car arrives, there is no reason to expect a different outcome. The Newey situation is particularly sensitive. He has publicly stated the AMR26 has tremendous development potential. In engineering language, that means the car is conceptually sound but badly executed, which is a way of saying the idea was mine, the execution failed because of external constraints. Whether that's accurate or whether its reputation management is a question the B-spec will answer. Let's zoom out and look at what this means for the rest of 2026. For the championship battle at the front, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, Aston Martin is currently irrelevant. That's a brutal thing to say about a team with their investment level, but the results make it unavoidable. The real championship question is whether they can avoid finishing last in the constructors, and whether the B-spec arrives early enough to salvage any constructors' points before the summer break. The team that should be watching this most carefully is Cadillac, because Cadillac, a brand new team spending their first year in Formula 1, built from scratch with a fraction of Aston's infrastructure, is currently beating them. That is embarrassing for Lawrence Stroll in a way that goes beyond sporting results. It is a direct challenge to the narrative he has been building for 6 years about what the right way to build an F1 team looks like. Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes are watching the Honda situation specifically. The RA626H is operating under the FIA's ADUO system, the same mechanism we've discussed in the context of Ferrari, which means Honda are getting additional dyno time and budget cap exemptions to fix their engine. A Honda power unit that gets fixed mid-season doesn't just help Aston Martin, it changes the relative competitiveness of the entire Honda supply chain for 2027 and beyond. Here's the scenario worth walking through. The B-spec arrives at Monaco or Canada. The new chassis is lighter, the engine mounting is redesigned to eliminate the vibration path, the suspension geometry is completely revised. Alonso extracts everything the car has. The AMR26B finishes in the points at 2 consecutive races. Honda's ADUO assisted engine upgrade arrives in the second half of the season. At that point, Aston Martin isn't fighting for the championship, but they're no longer a joke. And for a team with this much invested, financially, reputationally, personally, finishing 2026 with any credibility intact is the only realistic goal left. Here's the question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely don't have a clean answer. Is Lawrence Stroll's biggest mistake the technical decisions that produced this car, or is it that he built a team around his own vision of what a world championship project should look like without ever genuinely giving the people he paid to build it the authority to actually build it? Because those are two very different problems with very different solutions, and the answer matters enormously for whether Aston Martin 2027 looks anything like Aston Martin 2026. My bet is this: by the Canadian Grand Prix, we will see the first meaningful B-spec components running on the AMR26, and Alonso will extract at least one top 8 result from the upgraded package. Not because the car will be fixed, but because Alonso has been extracting results from broken cars his entire career, and the B-spec will give him just enough to work with. I could be completely wrong about the B-spec timeline. These things always take longer than announced, but the Honda ADUO process running in parallel gives Aston a second development pathway that is independent of their own internal politics, and that makes me slightly more confident that something useful arrives before the summer break. The suspension story, the vibration problem, the management conflict, the B-spec gamble, none of this resolves cleanly. That's why it's worth watching, not because Aston Martin might win, but because what happens to this project in the next 8 races will tell you everything about whether money and ambition are enough to build a winning F1 team, or whether the sport demands something else entirely. If you want to be in the room when that question gets answered, subscribe now. This channel will be here when it does.